there. What's going on, everybody? Happy Derby week as it has finally cooled down just a little bit here. We found the shade on the Indiana side of the Ohio River here. Keller coming to you from the residence here, and I hope you have enjoyed the Derby week so far. And wow, do we have a special guest for you coming up tonight. This is a man that I've followed his work since really the first year that I had a chance to work for FanDuel TV. 2011 was really the first year I had a chance to cover the Kentucky Derby. And also in 2011, I heard of somebody putting out herd dynamics where they were diving into the psyche of these racehorses and really giving you the communication between these horses within the herd, the hierarchy of kind of where they rank in the natural selection of competition. And the first year that Kerry Thomas selected the Kentucky Derby, his top pick was Animal Kingdom, 21-1. And he also mentioned in his report that he thought that Animal Kingdom had the wherewithal to go overseas and win a big race. And he did end up winning the Dubai World Cup. And then the very next year, the second year that Kerry Thomas did his herd dynamics report, his top pick in 2012 was I'll Have Another. So 2 straight years, the first 2 years of his report, he picked 2 long shot winners on top. And since then, the report has really been one of my favorite things to read all year. And tonight, if you're unfamiliar, we're going to explain the basics of herd dynamics. Yes, it does seem very complicated, but Kerry puts them into very learnable terms along the way, talking about each of these specific contenders. We're going to go through some terms that can get you kind of looking into the herd dynamics, and we're going to tell you where to find his report. It's going to be on Brisnet. $25. It'll be the best $25 you spend all year. I can promise you that. And keep in mind, when you watch and listen to these detailed reports, yes, of course, it applies to the Kentucky Derby coming up this weekend, but there's more races to run after this. We've got a Triple Crown series, we've got big summer 3-year-old races, and eventually into the Breeders' Cup Classic. So I really logged all of Kerry's work over the years, and I've actually worked with him kind of getting some of the best highlights of his horses. And as the trail progresses and as we move down the line, I go back to reference the herd dynamics report because it's been so spot on over the years, and the little idiosyncrasies, the nuances, the small bits of communication, and the larger sum of the result for what this presents truly has been something very special. And in terms of how much time Kerry Thomas has put into this report, how about a full month? One day to each contender. So one whole day dedicated to even, Society Man. Got a whole day of video work. I know that Kerry likes to watch these races in slow motion and putting them together to give you a report, again, which is going to include strengths, vulnerabilities, additional thoughts, and even the human factor. He kind of gives a little bit of advice in his mind to the connections of where this horse would be best suited to show their absolute best of their physical talent by pairing it up with, of course, the mental game. So Kerry Thomas is his name. I've been waiting a long time to do this, and Kerry is with us here. Kerry, I love talking to you all year round, but Derby week is my #1 time.
Yeah, here we are, Caleb, and thanks a lot for having me on. And I definitely appreciate the opportunity. It's pretty awesome. And this is my favorite time of year also, to tell you the truth. I mean, how could it not be?
Now, for the listeners that are trying to get an understanding of how you have this really special quality, you spent almost a decade out there in the wild doing field observations with kind of predator-prey interactions. So tell us about how this all came together for a long body of work.
Well, for me, I always figured that if you wanted to learn about a species, you need to learn, go to the laboratory of where this species is designed to live. Horses aren't designed to live, or we didn't create horses, from thin air. Mother Nature created the horses, and the best laboratory to learn about the horse, in my opinion, was, in the wilds where horses live just fine without human interaction. And, it's always been interesting to me about the dynamics of the interaction between the offensive and the defensive nature of the predator-prey interactions. What allows these horses, one of my biggest questions was that I didn't even know I had until I started to look at this with the wild Mustangs in Montana and Wyoming, the prior mountain Mustangs, if you will, to be more specific, was, how do these animals, how do they conceal themselves in plain sight? Leadership conceals itself through very subtle communications. The louder a horse talks, the more that you see them. From a predator standpoint, our eyes are drawn to what we see. You see the most insecure, the infirm, the young ones, things like that. They are the loudest talkers, and that's what zeroes in. As you climb the upper ranks, of herd dynamics in nature, the leadership is about subtleties. Leaders are about presence, and these characteristics. Over time, I learned that they translate, incredibly well to our world, and more importantly, to athletics.
Now, going back to, let's say, 2012, I know that you really loved the profile of I'll Have Another, who, of course, won that Derby at, let's say, 15-1. And one of the things that you mentioned in your report was that other horses react to I'll Have Another's presence without him doing anything to evoke their
Okay,
reaction.
you know what? Something that really gets me just so excited is when I see a horse who can affect the environment. When their presence just quietly affects other horses. These horses move through the environment, not just in the environment. And that is a leadership. Leadership is it's not a physical action. It is a psychological, it is emotional action. That is leadership. And we may put these horses in our environment, but we don't take the nature out of the horses. And so these same things, especially when it comes to bachelor herd dynamics, because in the wild you have family groups, but then, oh, by the way, there's bachelor herds. And, a race like the Kentucky Derby really shapes up quite a bit like a bachelor herd in motion. And there's a lot of parallels to those two things that can cross over. So it's a fascinating thing. And yes, I'll Have Another. I still get goosebumps thinking about him. When I first laid eyes and started studying that, and that was even in the infancy compared to where I am now, from all the work and research, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, and being all around the world, the presence that he had just really stands out for sure. As you can see, I get very animated and excited by this.
Now, for pretty much every race in America throughout the year, 14 horses is the most we can have. But we well know there's only one exception, and that is the Kentucky Derby with 20 horses. So there's not going to be a race that any of these horses will ever be in that has more stimuli, herd chaos, crowd noise, and things to take in along that journey.
Yeah, and that's part of it too. To me, it's all about how the operating system is running the machine, because we know what the horses are. And the hard data is extremely important. I would never deny that. The speed figures, the pedigrees, all the data that you can accumulate. Of course, physical structure, the body types, and all those things are very, very important elements. That's common sense. But there's another factor behind that. These horses are emotionally driven athletes. And I always say that performance is driven by that emotion, and how a horse is able to handle not just normal stresses, like the commonly experienced stresses in their daily lives, but competitive stress is a different thing. And then you have competitive stress over duration. Horses don't look at distance, physical distance, like we do. It is about duration. Distance is measured in time. How much time am I going to be hyper focused on a task? My body can go, you can train the physical horse to run 2 miles. I mean, they might not do it fast, but you can physically train to a certain point. But psychologically, if the horse doesn't have it naturally, they're only going to take that so far in a competitive fashion. There's a difference between running a race and being competitive in a race.
And what Kerry's saying is it's not about the 10 furlongs. It's about the 2 minutes of the stresses that come along with that competition. So it's not necessarily about distance, but more about the duration. And for the new learners of herd dynamics, let's break the two main categories into two. And it's going to basically come down to individual herd dynamic and group herd dynamic. Tell us the difference between those.
So what I found, and so in a natural setting, a horse psychology is made up of two different parts. I break it in parts. So in the natural world, females, their psychology is predicated upon 75% group dynamic and 25% individual dynamic because of their role in the herd. So you figure a filly or mare's role in the herd, she's kind of in the middle, she's running the show. She has to be able to multitask. So there's that handles multiple stimulus at one time in all the different sensory zones, and there's 6 sensory zones around the horse. So the group dynamic takes care of, it's really the fundamental communication that a horse has, and that handles the masses, and that includes stimuli in the environment and from other horses. The individual dynamic is very singular, very linear. It's a one-to-one thing. I do this, I see this, I go there, and it's very linear. It's very targeted. And it's also, it is where athletic expression manifests in a horse. So the IHD is extremely important for the athlete, but it's also important to have, that IHD can get you to a certain point, but the GHD helps you conserve energy, helps you anticipate herd motion, helps you handle situational chaos. The IHD helps you physically respond to that.
And what we'll see in learning about these horses is that a lot of horses are slanted towards one way. Like, let's say
Mhm.
Bodemeister. Bodemeister was an extreme slant towards individual herd dynamic because he just wanted to run by himself. He wanted to be his own
Yep.
individual. Other horses are more planted in the group herd dynamic. They're very well aware of where they are in the group, and the best horses combine them both.
Yes, yes, yeah. The best horses combine them both, especially, this is where distance matters to the type of characteristics, the psychological slants, if you will, because our breeding has kind of mixed this all together, So in nature, what you'll find is it's very common for the males to have 75-25, IHD, GHD, and the females, is the opposite. So those two things make 100. That allows the herd family unit to function properly in nature. And in our breeding programs, we have bred a lot for, hypersensitivity, faster psychological rhythms, more IHD in a lot of ways, to put it on that term. And so what we have is we have a motley mixture of different things coming together with our horses. And the thoroughbred especially has been bred for an IHD shifted slant. But, the horses that have both, that have GHD, that helps them conserve emotional energy, and the IHD allows them to put that into practice and execute it in an athletic expression. And that is where you can cruise along, and then like, bam, I go into attack mode. So it's kind of like I can hide for a while and just go ho hum, and just cruise along, and then I'm going to dial it in. Some horses dial it up over time. Some horses can drop the clutch and then hold it for a long time.
One thing you have to realize about Kerry is that he's basically never made a bet. So it's all about the herd psyche for Kerry. But the bettors like me and you are going to use this information and hopefully apply it to the Derby and also moving forward. So, Kerry, let's go through the major contenders. And the way I've decided to go through this field this year is we're going to go for the pace. We're going to start with what we believe is going to be, the horses leading the race, and we'll work all the way back. So I'm going to use my man Scotty McKeever's pace figures on Equinedge, which are the most accurate pace figures out there. And he's got Dornoch making the lead. Now, again, this report for Kerry Thomas is available for just $25 on Brisnet, and you can see all of his things at kerrymthomas.com. But you mentioned in the report about Dornoch as we begin on the contenders. I don't say this often, but post position 1 wouldn't be so bad for this horse, and the jockey should let him roll. This is a horse that you say loves open space and not targeting another rival.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that I that I said that at the end. I'm like, you know what? I got to think after studying this horse. I'm like, dang, you knew something. Actually, the one hole would be the most ideal place for this type of horse for the way he runs. And I have some bullet point notes on this horse, Caleb, if you want to go through any of these.
Please.
So I have I have them for every horse that we're going to talk about. I put together some key performance points, if you will, and things about Dornoch that I have written down that are good bullet points to note, or that he exhibits remarkable physical efficiency and emotional drive, allowing him to secure early positions. That means he comes out of the gate and he's right into that IHD. He goes right into it, right from the get-go. From when that gate opens, he's right into combat mode. And that's a beneficial thing for a horse when they're pinned, quote unquote, pinned against the rail, to have that natural mindset that he does not need to come out and assess the environment before he takes off.
And similarly, Track Phantom, another horse that could potentially make the lead, is you said that his primary strength is his physical efficiency, which helps him get early momentum as he has the stamina to sustain it. He hits his full individual herd dynamic expression very early, nearly immediately, and it helps him outrun the herd chaos. And what you say is what I've been telling the audience all year. Track Phantom is the best breaker from the gate in this year's Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, he's extremely efficient. Track Phantom is extremely efficient, and that is going to benefit when you have a lot of chaos going on at the beginning, a lot of potential chaos going on at the beginning. To be able to have a good clean break. I mean, it's important in every race, but from a psychological standpoint, I always look at two different things in a horse. I want to know, is the horse going to have to physically outrun himself, or can the psychology pick up, and be ahead of that body, or does he have to outrun his own inefficiencies to win?
Now, I know I like to use Bodemeister as a reference point because he has such a unique profile, but you mentioned that Bodemeister, his comfort zone was being by himself. Now, Track Phantom's a little bit of a different type of front runner in the
Mhm.
fact that you said Track Phantom emotionally relaxes best and enjoys the most mind to body fluency when in the company of a mate to run with. It's almost like he's inviting in a rival.
He is, because what he does, so he is basically, what I would term as buddying up. He's outsourcing to find a cadence. You want the horses. Their primary thing is to find harmony and contentment in their environment. They want to find a cadence with the environment that they have around them. And so some horses can, don't lean on other horses. They don't need a buddy to do that with. And some horses do. And Track Phantom benefits from the cadence of other horses. He can just, he'll eventually find that rhythm, in the company of another horse. So now you have to be careful, of course, in competition, what horse, as the jockey that you decide to partner up with, because you may get outrun, or you may get chewed up mentally. It's kind of a risk factor of where you are from a herd structure standpoint, but it is the best way for him to conserve emotional energy and carry that forward.
Now, the next two horses we're going to talk about are both sons of Justify, and Justify had one of the most remarkable write-ups that you've ever had. Now, Justify, we know, was a fast horse who really was grounded in independent herd dynamic. He was doing battles
Mhm.
up front, but what made him unique, as you mentioned, was that he had a full 360 surveillance around him. He could tell whatever horse was behind him and coming up. You mentioned the egg that goes around the horse. Not all front runners have this gift, and Justify
Mhm.
had it.
Yeah, Justify had such a unique combination of an elite group dynamic where he was highly efficient, and it's very important for a horse to have sensory efficiency. They have to be able to, you know, identify and interpret and process and respond to stimuli in a fast sequence. They have to do this very, very quickly to different things. And horses that can do that, they just kind of float through. They have complete control of their environment. They have full environmental awareness, and if they have good depth perception, believe it or not, that is a very important part of a horse, because depth perception, if I can say it right, is not just up and down, but it's also in and out. So a horse to know where they are in relation to other horses allows them to anticipate movement and effectively respond to that ahead of time, because they can read the actions of other horses around them. And and the thing about horses, obviously, we know that they see the world in pretty much a circle. So in the natural herd structure, they can lead from any position. Leadership is not a physical position; it is a mental position. I've seen so many good horses, actually, who are high herd dynamic horses that finished second, third, second, third, second, third. They had second-itis or third-itis or whatever you want to call it. They just never seemed to punch through. But from a herd structure standpoint, they were dictating the rhythms. They were actually in control of the herd motion, and they just didn't put their nose across the wire first, which is frustrating for us. And that's where training and coaching, kind of comes into play to help facilitate that.
And one thing about herd dynamics is that you're not just always at a certain point on the hierarchy. You can
No.
rise up the hierarchy, or you can fall down the other side. So a horse like Just a Touch here, who we know is an extreme talent, he's only had 3 starts. He's one of those horses that is rising up the herd ladder.
The one thing I like going into the Derby, and I will say, the reports that I do, the evaluations that I do for the Derby, or about the horses in the Derby, this is an information about the horse going into the race and how they fit, from their own point of view, from their own self. And the one thing I like to always look for in a horse is I don't always like a horse that's peaked. I'm not as excited by a horse that's coming in and always having won every race, or this kind of things. I like to see horses that have an emerging property, that are peaking at the right time, or they have a good psychological growth pattern that kind of keeps moving that dial forward. And to me, it shows, it's kind of that unknown part that is very, very exciting, like what's next. And this horse, one of the cool things about studying horse psychology and herd dynamics and all these things is that there is a behavioral genetic stamping. So there is a behavioral stamping at play just as much as there are physical stamping. And now we know that, but when you really dive into it, there are characteristics and traits and tendencies that stamp forward on certain family lines, whether it's the male or the female, whether it's the broodmare or the stallion. In this case, I do see some very clear earmarks of behavioral genetic stamping from Justify.
Okay, now at the last part of each write-up that you have in your herd dynamics report, again, it's on Brisnet, $25, best 25 you spent all year. Now, you kind of give some advice to the connections, which I thought this one could be a bit contradicting to how they're going to ride this race. It said, I would hate to see impatience or any worry of exactness of position. Let the herd be what the herd is, will be above all else. Don't ask him to run into an independent herd dynamic pattern of motion unless absolutely necessary. But when I look at Just a Touch and the aggressive riding Florent Giroux likes getting into second early. So, this is a horse that I feel that they are going to ask him to get into that exact position early in the race.
Yeah, and I just think that if you're not working with the natural herd structure, you're working against it. And to me, it's like you have to put your personal bias aside and ride with the horse's strengths. And that's why in this year's report, I compared the strengths of the horse individually with their individual vulnerabilities and brought those two together with the additional thoughts, which is essentially the scouting report for this analysis. And my thoughts on the jockey and the compatibility with the herd structure and this horse's nature is that you don't want to try to do too much too early, because I would trust this horse and let him be who he is. And I think he's still young. Okay. So if you're going to try to engage this horse early, he's going to feed off of that. He's like, oh, okay, let's go. But dude, you got 10 furlongs. Okay. I break it down into seconds. So let's just say we have 120 seconds to work with. I don't want to fire in the first 20 seconds unnecessarily, when I know I have a lot of horse that I can save and I can feather my way through, and then I can drop that clutch, and take advantage of the situation in the last 20 seconds. I want to break it into compartments, and you don't need to win. You're not going to win the race right out of the gate, but you can lose it there.
Now, the other of the Justify colts, Just Steel, who I believe carries 1,300 pounds. Justify was like 1,250, and they bring out these big hulking horses, just like Just FYI, the juvenile fillies champion. Now, I know you like to make the NASCAR reference that in NASCAR, if you're driving a great race, you can draft behind a car and then come out at the perfect time. And Just Steel, as you go through your profile, looks to be the drafter of this year's Derby.
Yeah, he definitely benefits. I mean, he's raced 11 times going into the Derby, and he's very naturally adept at drafting. Like if he was in NASCAR, he would be that ideal drafter, where taking advantage of someone else breaking the path a little bit, and that helps him conserve energy. And I would take advantage of that all day long. I would eat that up the whole entire race, up until obviously at a certain point, and then I'd be looking to pounce. But I would save that energy through that drafting.
It's amazing.
It's really cool. I mean, I can't tell you how much fun it is. Like I do spend countless hours on one horse on one race, because I watch it over and over and over and over and over. But I'm looking for the tiniest nuances, the tiniest little things, and not just with the horse that I'm focused on, but the other horses around them. If you really want to learn about a horse's pattern of motion, you want to focus on not just that horse, but the horses around them as well. And and watch the little ways that they are affected or not affected. I mean, sometimes horses put up a roadblock and you're like, well, damn. Okay, he can't fight out of a paper bag. He can run like heck, but he can't part the seas. Some horses can just come up and like, hello, get out of my way,
But also, I think that it shows that he's comfortable in that position, because some horses, if they're
100%.
behind, they want to have that open space to look at. But he actually is very comfortable having almost a tour guide through the herd chaos.
Exactly. And that tells you a lot right there, Caleb, about how good his sensory efficiency is. He is clearing space. So the sensory system needs to clear space at least 2 times faster than the body is moving. Okay, you'll see this whether I'm watching an Amish horse go down the road, a horse that's eventing or show jumping, or a horse on the racetrack. If they have an efficient sensory system and they are effectively clearing space, they keep an even cadence. They can fluctuate physical speed, but it's kind of like watching a flock of birds that never hit each other. They have this ebb and this flow. It's very harmonic. And that's because they have an efficient sensory system clearing the space. They have self-awareness, they have depth perception, and they are comfortable whether they're 10 meters away from a horse or right up a horse's tailpipe.
All right, let's get to the headliner of this year's Kentucky Derby. We're talking about Fierceness. Now, this horse has given us some of the most sensational speed figures. I mean, this horse has run faster than American Pharoah at 2 and 3. He comes in with the biggest margin on the buyer scale from first to second that we've seen basically in the modern day of buyer speed figures, but also he's given us some really puzzling bad performances. He was seventh, beaten 20 lengths at a big favorite at 2. He started off this year with a well-documented third place clunker in the Holy Bull. So what is your idea behind the Derby favorite Fierceness?
Well, for me, it comes down to what I just talked about earlier, and it's one key thing for me. It is his ability to have self-awareness and depth perception. I think he has some compromises in that area, and that has, and it's very, very environmentally predicated upon the environment, as you'll see if you study his races. And there are certain times where, he gets a little bit delayed in his responses because of what I determine to be self-awareness and depth perception, a little bit slow at different times, depending on the environment. And I think that's what's been happening to him. And so it's going to be very important it's going to be very key of how things go with him in this Derby. I mean, I love the horse. He's got tons of talent. I know his father very well, from the sales, and that kind of thing. So that's another story. But I know this horse. I know his father. I see some similarities, having profiled now both of these horses, and so, but that's where it comes down to me. I mean, he is still a work in progress in that part of his century efficiency and that part of his herd dynamic. Extremely powerful. He's got a strong herd dynamic power. He's got a very efficient century system in the forward aspect, what I call that zone 1 aspect out here in front. But it is on the obliques on the left and the right, the zone 6, zone 2, if you're familiar with my work in the mapping. Those are the areas that he has a little bit of delay. And depending on the spacing between that, he can get caught up in that. And if he gets caught up in that, the gig is up, because you'll see, as you call them clunkers, it's not the same horse. Because if you hesitate, moments of hesitation can cost you, how many body lengths. I mean, it's over. If you have a horse that's got momentum coming up on you and you're hesitating on those century, determining where you are, that can be the gig. I mean, that can be everything for you. But the chances of that happening, it's a horse race. It's a horse race.
Now, I do think that we had one scratch of Encino and Epic Ride draws into the race. Now, originally, Fierceness from the 17 really had no problem having that outside stalking position, because the 18, Stronghold, Resilience, Society Man, they weren't going to run with him early. Epic Ride's a little different because John Ennis, he wants to blast out. So now Fierceness, when he comes out, it looked like he was just going to have horses to his left. Now, at least early, this Epic Ride might charge him up and put a little speed into the race early outside of him.
And I wouldn't be surprised, Caleb, if he shows, if he just triggers that individual dynamic where it's like, oh yeah, up yours, I'm coming at you. You're going to try to take my space. You're going to engage this horse because he is a competitor. I mean, you're talking about elite competitors here, and this is the cool thing. You're looking at some of the best horses. You're looking at some of the best combat, in the world, coming to face here. Where individually they're standouts, and now they're up against other standouts or people or other horses that have high efficiency, even if it's in a small box. So that, like you said, that early indication of how is he going to handle that. I think if I'm in the saddle, I want to be very wary that I don't get engaged in that fight, because you don't want to add to that. These horses are very hypersensitive. If your emotions are going to feed into their emotions, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you agree with me. Let's go do this. So you have to be careful with how you express yourself in the saddle too.
Now, the individual herd dynamic and the group herd dynamic, they can grow at different rates. And you mentioned in your report on Fierceness, Fierceness has an interesting psychological growth pattern where his individual herd dynamic has matured at a much significantly faster rate than his group herd dynamic.
Yeah, it has. And part of that is, from breeding, part of that is from his career, what he's doing in his career that has, he's exercised that part of his psychology a lot more, because that's the athletic part. And that is that combat, competition area. The GHD for him, the group dynamic for him is coming along, and but it has been a little bit more of a drag. And see, the group dynamic is what deals with the multiple stimuli, that depth perception. So we're going to find out come Derby day how much further that has caught up. If that has caught up, and we'll find out, then it could be lights out. If it has not quite caught up yet, he may be a race away from it being lights out for him. It all depends on where that's at.
Now, Kerry, you've done work all over the world. We've seen pictures of you profiling lawn row. You actually did some work overseas this year teaching these seminars. And
Yeah.
our international crusader, one of two, we've got Tio Password as well. But the big star from overseas, from Japan, is Forever Young, who is yet to lose a race.
Yep, Forever Young. Yeah, and you know what? It's always interesting for me to watch the foreign races, especially that I don't understand the language, because I mean, number one, I'm colorblind, so it takes me a long time. I have to watch a race and then find out, okay, he wins and that kind of thing. But Forever Young is a very interesting horse, but I had some efficiency concerns with his century efficiency. To me, is a little bit concerning. And I mean, look at my notes here, Caleb, on this guy.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that you wrote, Kerry. I thought it was interesting. You said, Forever Young is a fast cycling, independent herd dynamic horse and does not need any added squeeze from the saddle to pull his trigger. Essentially, what you're saying is he'll decide himself when he's ready to make the move and doesn't need that encouragement from the jockey.
No, he doesn't. He's very, very self-reliant, and he's one of these horses that he pretty much likes to beat to his own drum. And that can also work against you in this type of competition because, the thing of it is, like, these horses run in large fields over there, in Japan and in different places around the world more than they do commonly here. But you got to discount that because, yes, they were in the gate with a whole lineup of horses. But when they're racing, what is the field of view for him? What is the reality? The reality is just a couple horses that are around him or near him. That is who he's racing against or competing with. So, as far as the big herd size and the big field size, I don't put a whole lot of stock into that as far as the environment because generally he's outrunning the majority of those horses anyhow. So he shrinks those numbers down.
And then we look at a horse like Mystic Dan, who had one huge race in the Southwest. Now, the thing about the herd dynamic growth is that there is a point where you actually can't complete the herd growth. And you mentioned that to some degree, Mystic Dan might have completed all the work that he needs to do, and maybe he's already hit the zenith.
Yeah, and I really like Mystic Dan. I mean, Mystic Dan is my 4x4. He is my mud bog. If I'm going out in the mud, I'm taking Mystic Dan with me because he just really excels with this. But I do fear partly in my mind that his growth pattern is complete. So we're seeing his best, right here. We're seeing who he is. We know who he is. In my opinion, he has reached the full capacity of his growth patterns. And I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of room to grow from that. There can be more chiseling down and more refinement, but he is who he is. But Ken did to me a stellar job of nurturing and enriching this horse's career. Like, I really tip my hat to what I think is one of the best patient training jobs that I have seen in a long time from a herd dynamic and a century efficiency standpoint.
And you mentioned too how different the psyche can be, whether or not they're liking the surface that their hoofs are hitting. We talk about Exaggerator. Exaggerator went in a 4-race stretch where it rained in the Preakness, he won.
Yeah.
It was a fast track in the Belmont, he ran 11. It rained in the Haskell, he won. It was a fast track in the Travers, he finished 11th. So literally first or 11th based on if it rained or not.
Yeah, and Mystic Dan, to that point, his group dynamic is so efficient that he is putting his sense of feel on that surface. He gets the most out of that, and he's very, very steady with that. It's very, very steady with that, and so he's not doing the same amount of emotional push. If you watch horses, here's something really interesting to watch. When you're watching horses and watch them race, you can see, and I talk about emotional energy distribution, and if you watch how a horse hits the ground. Okay, watch how they're hitting the ground and watch where their head carriage is. You can see, sometimes you'll see, it looks like they're going like a bobber this way, bouncing, Sometimes you'll see them going this way. Sometimes you'll see their energy is kind of going this way. If you pay attention to that, how a horse hits the ground and how their concussion, it's not just a physical concussion, it's where that energy is being dispersed. If they have to push down, if they have to spend $3 to push down to get $1 out, okay, over time, that's going to burn you out. You're going to have mental fatigue. Okay. And so this is where the surface comes into play. that where a horse is expending a lot of energy, hitting the ground hard and pushing off with a lot of thrust. Okay, but then the surface changes, so they're losing energy because of the surface absorbing that energy. All right, so that shortens the competitive distance. From a psychological standpoint, now you begin to have some mental fatigue, not just physical fatigue, because physical fatigue is just one part of it. What really concerns me about horses competing is how far can they go until mental fatigue kicks in, because mental fatigue there's nothing that will mitigate physical talent more than mental fatigue.
Now let's get to Resilience, the winner of the World Memorial. He was fourth in the Risen Star, which we know was a key race. And one very interesting observation you made on Resilience.
The fourth.
Resilience
Not
is
much
very
running
good
home with
at disappearing in the crowd, using other horses' emotional efforts to time his rhythm, but not in a needy way, it says.
No, not in a needy way. This horse is very, very purposeful. So when I talk about in the natural herd structure, how you watch horses. And one cool thing I got to do this year, we got to study the Brumbies in Australia in the Snowy Mountains, do some field research out there, and it's so awesome. But what you see is that leadership conceals itself in plain sight by disappearing in plain sight. And so this is what he does. He has this natural tendency, this natural characteristic to basically hide in plain sight, and it's a very, very savvy thing. To me, it's a very strong representation of herd dynamic power. And I believe that it is emerging.
And similar, let's put it into a context of, let's say, the Lion King. Mufasa would be the leader of the pack if they're going through the desert. That doesn't necessarily mean that he needs to actually be in front or show this expression, but quietly others know that he is the leader. And sometimes you blend in and disappear with the pack as you go through.
Yeah, definitely. And he has the ability there's presence there. I broke this film down, all of his races down 6 ways a Sunday. And what I saw very consistently was an emerging herd dynamic strength where other horses were beginning to respond to his presence. And they were beginning to respond to his presence in different ways that says they're beginning to adjunct or they're beginning to acquiesce. The trick is, that's all well and good. Okay, you can be the strongest herd dynamic in the field and still finish fourth. And the trick is to give that time in motion, to sort itself out. And to me, he's beginning to learn how to do that. He's beginning to dial this in to like stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. But I have to say that the blinkers concern me some, though.
One thing you also mentioned about Resilience is that, okay, so he goes along nicely in this group herd dynamic, but he also has the perfectly timed instinct of when to launch into independent herd dynamic, when to go into one-on-one battles.
Yeah, he's very, very good at that. And it's getting stronger. I mean, it's really getting stronger. If you look, there's a lot of moving parts to this horse from the psychological standpoint. He's got a lot of strength in the group dynamic, but it's not an anchor. It is operating very, very efficiently in an athletic way. The individual dynamic is very patient. He's learning to pick his spots, and it can be very frustrating. Horses like this can frustrate the heck out of you because you're like, I know what you have in here. You got to release it, but they need to go through their progressions. That is the natural growth pattern. And sometimes we get too impatient with that and we try to tighten up the screws. And yes, you may funnel energy in a certain spot, but sometimes you're losing, what you're gaining, what you're losing, you kind of have to weigh that out.
We go to the Santa Anita Derby winner and Stronghold. In a lot of years, we know that the Santa Anita Derby winner, if not the favorite, is in that top group. Not necessarily this year. Stronghold also is one of the slighter built horses in this Derby. He's not big and tall and brawny like some of the other colts, but you mentioned that Stronghold is consistent, runs very straight, clears space well, and mentally, the inception of the battles he confronts, he does not do it with fear.
No, he is a no fear, coming at you in your face, son of a gun. And if I'm going into a street brawl, I'm going to take him with me, and we're going to go at it because he is not going to back down from a challenge. He almost has a very interesting independent part of that nature, that operates as almost predatory. And that's very, very savvy, and it's extremely useful in combat. So he gets the most efficiency out of that body. He gets the most power out of that body. His power does not really come from his physical structure. It comes from his mental fortitude. That's where the power comes from, and he can sustain it. I mean, this is a dang fine horse, and it was a fun write up, and hope you get a chance to read it in more detail.
And then we get to the most expensive horse in this year's Kentucky Derby, Sierra Leone. If you got a little $2.3 million in the couch cushions, you could have bought Sierra Leone. And as our assistant Jess at FanDuel said it best, he looks more like a dragon than a horse. So impressive physically, but what do you see from his psyche?
Well, there's some group dynamic inefficiencies, and there's some delays in the century efficiency. I mean, you'll see. I mean, if you look at the bluegrass right here, this was the bluegrass. He pounces. I mean, he's in a good spot to pounce. He has that momentum, and he's definitely a heck of a fighter. But there are some inefficiencies in drag, and you'll see that he gets, what I call floaty, because on the obliques, on the left and right part of his century system, he's not necessarily has the best guardrails. So he is almost a body ahead of that mind type of athlete, but he's got a heck of a physical talent, and he outruns his own inefficiencies more often than not, or he has shown that he can. But that strong IHD is coupled with that competitive edge. He's got a strong competitive edge. I mean, it is very, very lethal in combat, but there are some nagging things that concern me. This is where the GHD being not as efficient in a larger field and it's not just the race. It's not just getting into the starting gate. Okay. There's this whole thing before they get into the starting gate. So, the duration of mental fortitude, by the time you get to the gate, you've already, been in a different environment than you've ever been in before leading up to a race. And so I don't know how is he going to handle that? I mean, how much energy is going to be left when he gets in there? It may not affect him at all, or it could be an effect, but he is so IHD shifted that, he risks leaking emotional energy even before he gets to the gate. And it may or may not affect him. But that is a concern of mine.
You mentioned too that you were afraid that maybe they open their lunchbox a little early and don't have any snacks left at the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd rather have something to snack on before bedtime than eat it all for breakfast. And to me, it's one of those things where they open it up and early and just let it roll. Let it be what it is, and have not really tried to. And it may not be a fair statement from my perspective, from a psychological standpoint. He could benefit from a little bit of checks and balances in that to engage the GHD, see if you can extend the patience a little bit longer, and see if you can get him to practice more of group dynamic and being more, field friendly, so that he is not expending energy all the time. It's always full throttle mentally. It's always, so how far does that go in heavy combat? And when you're duking it out against other horses who have already fought up front, per se, like the bluegrass. There was a battle up front, and you're coming down to the wire, and there's some mental attrition, there's a physical attrition, and you had a couple of horses going head to head, and you really just popped out, and you got your full steam ahead. You've been kicked out of the slingshot, bam, and that's his best attack mode. But it's also environmentally, it's predicated upon the environment. So are you going to get that look again in the Derby? I don't know.
We got two more horses we're going to hit on, and we're taking the full hour. Shout out to our producer, Emily Shields, who's been incredible all throughout the week setting up these social media shows. I know you've enjoyed them in the morning. This one with Kerry Thomas, we've really been looking forward to. So one of the last two we're going to hit on is Catching Freedom. Similar to Sierra Leone, inside post, nice, strong late kick. And you mentioned that Catching Freedom drives himself hard, almost too hard at times, but he has the physical prowess to accommodate his emotional strength.
Yeah, this is one of these things where sometimes you have a horse that has more mental talent than physical capacity or physical ability, and then sometimes you have a horse that has more physical talent than mental aptitude or fortitude to to get the advantage of that. He definitely has the physical ability to stay with his psychology, and then his has a resilience and fearlessness that is definitely something that I admire.
Now, his second race of his career was at Churchill, and he ran fourth. And it was a really bad trip. He exploded late when he finally got out, but he could never get to the right spot. And you mentioned that independent herd dynamic combat chaos, try to limit it, try to mitigate the need for abrupt lateral or oblique movements, which basically goes back. If you watch that second race, he couldn't get to the spots he needed to laterally.
No, he's not going to be efficient on the laterals, because this goes back to the century efficiency on this left and right oblique area being compromised. Okay, so everything for him is right here, and it's a very small window. So the straighter you can make this happen, that energy is all right here. If you're asking him to deal with things over here or over here, okay, now you're pulling it in from here. He doesn't have the wherewithal to balance that out and define a harmony and cadence, between all these different areas, and still keep a physical fluency going forward in the same rate, in the same pace. He's going to have to slow down in order to do that. But he doesn't like to slow down. So he's going to give everything he's got to every single situation. And to me, you have to you got to protect the horse. Sometimes you have to protect, the coach has to protect the athlete. You heard that saying many times. And I think this is a situation where that holds true.
And then one more horse we're going to hit on, Honor Marie, who really for the last month or so has been quite the buzz horse. Third start off the layoff, first ever starter for Whit Beckman in the Derby. And he was second to Catching Freedom in this Louisiana Derby.
Yeah, Honor Marie, I have a cool note here about Honor Marie. I'll just read it to you. Honor Marie showcases remarkable sensory soundness and herd dynamic awareness. His ability to focus on distant targets and navigate herd chaos sets him apart. While demonstrating an impressive blend of individual and group dynamics, his performance hinges on his mental stamina and adaptability to varying herd structures. And that's the key for him in the Derby, is it's going to hinge on his mental stamina and his ability to adapt to situational chaos in the herd structure.
So Kerry Thomas, again, puts out this report every year going back to 2011. His first 8 years, the winner came from his top 2 picks, including Animal Kingdom and I'll Have Another. You can find this on Brisnet, or you can go to kerrymthomas.com. But for also the trainers and owners and horsemen and women out there, you are available through your website for profiling a active racehorse and giving the psyche profile to show them how to maximize that physical talent.
Yeah, I've been doing bloodstock for many, many years and been involved, Run Happy as a horse, a main horse that we picked out, Beauty Generation in New Zealand, went to Hong Kong. Had a evaluation process in the sale for the horse that became City of Light. Very proud of that, and so I've been around some amazing horses all around the world. And yes, if you go to the website, kerrymthomas.com, you can look at the services. You'll see all kinds of things there. You'll see thoroughbred services. And if you're interested in learning more about the terminology, because I have I've created my own lexicon over the years. And so there is a free resource, the glossary of terminology and phrases. That's even downloadable. You can get everything that's on there that I talk about. All the definitions are there, bring more clarity to this. But once you start digging into this, I've never been able to look back. Once I started to peel back that curtain, I was like, oh man, like, to me, this is the part of the horse. We know, like I said earlier, we know what the horse is. Let's find out who the horse is, and this is what drives my passion.
Very well said, Kerry. Tremendous stuff. I know that we might have had some questions along the way. Make sure that you get to Kerry at View from the Hoof on the Twitterverse, and of course, you can find him through the website. But if you have those questions that you want to ask Kerry, I'm sure he would be accommodating to answer those. And again, brilliant work this year. You spent a whole month on it. 50-something pages of absolute gold. And this is going to apply well to this Derby and also the races moving forward.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I wanted to offer something with residual effect. I'm always looking to give people not just about the Kentucky Derby. It's about the horses that are in it, that are competing in it. And so, and this year I've incorporated, if you get the report, you'll see I've incorporated something brand new called a competitive edge rating system. So the horses have a competitive edge rating, a score that they are assigned based upon their physical and psychological attributes and how they merge together from an athletic standpoint. So, yeah, I'm really excited by that and breaking into new ground with some of this research. And I'll continue to push the envelope because, that's just how I am.
And that competitive edge scorecard, we went horse by horse, but we can't give you everything. We want to put you in a spot where you go and learn how to get involved with these herd dynamics. And in terms of Kerry's scorecard this year, you might be surprised at the top pick. Again, he's had an incredible record over the year. So Kerry, again, special thanks to you and everybody.
I was surprised at my top pick.
I like it. Hey, this is really exciting. And
I looked at it, I'm like, okay, I follow my instincts. To me, if you're going to understand an emotional athlete, you got to follow your instincts. Sometimes you got to take the numbers and throw them out the window. It's what do you feel what do you really feel about this? And, and then just not overthink it.
His report is available on Brisnet. We wanted to remind you, we're going to be live on site for FanDuel TV all week. We have that $20 no sweat Derby win bet here that you want to get involved with. That's for all customers, even, of course, the FanDuel customers that we already have. And also a big shout out to our social producer, Emily Shields. She's been working tirelessly. She put all these backtracks together and replays for us. If you've enjoyed the work show and tonight's event as well, you can certainly thank Emily and the rest of our crew. Kerry, happy Derby week to you, and let's hope for a safe trip around Churchill Downs.
That's it. Thanks a lot, Caleb.
And we'll see you next time.